So, good afternoon. Welcome to this panel. I would like to welcome the panelists. The panel one will discuss saving our global system, and Greg will introduce to the topic. I have some announcements to make. I will start with the announcement of we had some side events today. Elizabeth Batuti, for example, went to the TCV, to the Tibetan Children Village. This was a side event, and there will be also other activities going on during these 2 days. So please follow us on Facebook and on social media and share these different activities with your friends. The conference will produce a manifesto, and the idea is that to include in this manifesto the discussions and the inputs that the panelists but also the audience give us. And I would like to ask Gunther, who's in charge of this manifesto, say some few words how the process will be. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Wangpola. So if you look at the title of our conference, we called it Dialogue for Our Future, a Call to Climate Action. So we are aware that conferences are very useful in bringing people together, are very useful in focusing on problems, and are also useful in raising awareness about problems. But if afterwards nothing happens, then all the energy generated and the goodwill and the insights will just sort of dissipate and nothing will happen. So in thinking about what the outcome of our conference, of this conference should be, we said, well, this conference is right in between COP26 and COP27. We would like to have a manifesto that sort of propels the world community and concerned citizens towards COP27, now that we are at the halfway point. So we prepared a document. But of course, we did this before, and we did not know what the discussions in these 4 panels would bring up, what new ideas, what new concepts, what stronger message will come out of these 2.5 days we bring here together. So what we have prepared so far is only a draft. And we are very much looking forward to the inputs from the speakers, to the outcome from the discussions, and also from the answers to the questions that will be raised by you here, but also by the more than 1,000 people who are following us online. And we will add these to the draft that we have prepared, so that at the end we really have a result that incorporates also what has been discussed here in these 2.5 days in Dharamshala and online with the people following us. So this is, in a few words, what the Climate Manifesto is about. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Gunther. And now I would like to give the floor to Greg.
Thank you, Wangpola. Thank you, Gunther. And thanks to everyone who's joined us here in the room and online from around the world. My name is Greg Bruno. I'm a journalist and an author. And it's my great pleasure to moderate this opening panel of Dialogue for Our Future. Today is Earth Day 2022. And just a few hours ago, we had an incredible honor of speaking with the Dalai Lama in person about the importance of protecting our planet. He said one thing that I wanted to just share with everyone here. He stressed that we cannot solve this crisis alone, that we are all fundamentally the same, and that we're all in this together. To me, this is a call to action. We are all in this room, and we're watching from our homes and our computers around the world, and we're facing a collective challenge. Without each other working together and in harmony, we will not succeed. So I'm joined on stage and online by some amazing people, some scientists, policymakers, activists, who are at the very vanguard of climate solutions. Reversing climate change and restoring our planet's natural balance is arguably one of the most difficult tasks humanity has ever faced. But we're lucky to be joined by people who are actually doing the work and are leading those efforts. So a couple programming notes before we dive into the conversation. If you're in the room, please silence your phone. I don't want to be jealous about how many messages you get. If you're online and watching through Zoom, you can ask questions using the chat or Q&A function. Yesterday we had a massive following from the Philippines, and hopefully that continues today, where Mitzi is. And when you ask a question, please, whether it's online or in person, tell us who you are and where you're from. And if you're on social media, you can use our hashtag, Dialogue for Our Future. So we only have 90 minutes, less now, to save the planet. So we better move quickly. Let me first introduce our panelists today. Diana Liverman is Director of the School of Geography, Development, and Environment in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Arizona. And she's a lead author on Ipcc reports. Dr. Vibha Dhwan is Director General of TERI, the Energy and Resource Institute, based in New Delhi, specializing in the field of energy, environment, and sustainable development. Elie Schlein is an Italian politician, environmentalist and social activist, and Vice President of Italy's Emilia-Romagna region. And Mitzi Tan, who joins us from outside Manila, is a climate justice activist based in the Philippines. She's the convener and international spokesperson of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. And finally, on stage with me here is Sona Monkchuk, a mechanical engineer who has spent more than 3 decades in the field of educational reform. He's also the inventor of the ice stupa, an artificial glacier in Ladakh that stores stream water in winter for use by regional farmers in the spring. And as we'll hear later, he just hand-delivered a block of glacier ice from Ladakh to His Holiness as a symbol of the urgency of action when it comes to solving the climate crisis. So thanks, everyone, for joining me, and thanks for being here. So I'd like to start with Diana. I want to set the stage from a scientific perspective, if we can. Get that out of the way. It is unequivocal, but with a flurry of Ipcc reports warning of dire consequences, I thought it would be best to set the stage. So Diana, over to you.
Thank you very much. And if I could have my first slide, which I believe is being shown by you guys, it would be great. It's a great privilege to talk to you all and to represent the hundreds of scientists who contribute to the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we're in the process of completing a series of reports that look at both what is happening to the climate, how it is affecting people, and what we can do about it. There's more than 10,000 pages that I'm going to try and summarize in 10 minutes. Next, please. So the message from all of the reports and all of the scientists is shown here. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Next. So just to give you a few of the key messages from the reports, one of the important ones is that the Earth has already warmed by 1.1 degrees C, that's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, since 1880 as a result of human activities from greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. Next. And this is unprecedented. This is the highest level of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, in 2 million years. Sea level is rising faster than it has for the last 3,000 years. Arctic sea ice is at the lowest level in 1,000 years. And glacier retreat is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. We are substantially changing the climate and the Earth system. Next. Someone is saying that they can't see the slides. Just heads up to Dharamsala. should I stop, Greg, because people online can't see the slides?
They're back now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so one of the things I want to point out, which is a little sad for us scientists, is that the first reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change were in 1990, and we tried to warn the world and its decision makers that 30 years ago. But unfortunately, since we did that initial warning, greenhouse gas emissions have increased by 50% since the Ipcc first warning. We are now seeing that people can't see the slides again. I'll try to talk visually so that you can understand what I'm showing. Next, please. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is that when we hear the world has already warmed by 1.1 degrees C, that's an average of land and sea. And what is important is that some regions have already warmed much more than others. The warming is higher over land, which I am showing on a slide with the darker red. It's also much higher across the Arctic region and in some real hotspots that include the Amazon and the Himalayas. All of these areas have already warmed more than 1.1 degree, with impacts such as the heat waves that we've been seeing in India this week. Next, please. So the current target, the international agreement, is to try and keep warming below 1.5 degrees C. But if you look at the current commitments, the current policies, we're not doing nearly enough to keep warming below a somewhat safe level. The Ipcc reported just a couple of weeks ago that without further action, we could overshoot 1.5 degrees C and we could reach more than 3 degrees centigrade. That's 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we reach those levels of temperature, not only will we see extremes of drought and heat waves and ice melting, we could actually trigger Earth system tipping points, such as the collapse of the ice sheets or the change of the Amazon forest to a grassland. Next. So what are some of the risks that Ipcc points to? Heat stress, millions of people harmed during heat waves, water scarcity, where regions relying on snowmelt could have 20% decline in water. That would affect agriculture and food security. And then there are about 1 billion people in low-lying cities by the sea and living on small islands who will be at risk from sea level rise by mid-century, although some are already being affected. Next. And every single bit of warming matters. The report that I worked on and the latest reports show a big difference in the potential loss of biodiversity, harm caused to other species. And it will be much greater at 3 degrees centigrade, with large areas of the world losing 25, 50% of your biodiversity, than if we're able to keep warming under 1.5 degrees, where there will still be loss, but it won't be nearly as serious. Next. So what are the, back one, please. What are the solutions that Ipcc examines? Well, first of all, we have to cope with the warming that's already happening, and the fact that we may continue to warm even if we do act pretty fast. We may still go through a period of warming before it levels off or cools. So we've got to figure out how we can adapt to that warming, help people cope with a warmer climate. But very important, the report a couple of weeks ago talks about how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the importance of doing so very fast, the issue of mitigating climate change. Next. So briefly on adaptation, one of the good news in the last year of scientific reports is that we were able to document that action on adaptation has increased. People are building defenses against sea level rise. People are designing buildings to cope with hotter climates. People are using nature-based solutions. But the progress is uneven. Many parts of the world have not made much progress, and we're definitely not adapting fast enough. Next. And Ipcc points out that there are limits to adaptation. There are places where we really can't adapt to the climate change. Low-lying islands, some coasts, the glaciers and snowmelt dependent communities, such as those around the third pole. Crops can't adapt to some of these very high temperatures. People can't adapt. And especially the poor are not able to afford to adapt by buying water, having air conditioning, or being able to purchase food as prices increase because of climate change. Next. But let's now turn to what Ipcc tells us about what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to keep warming under 1.5 degrees, Ipcc tells us that we need to stop greenhouse gas emissions growing immediately. In fact, we should have stopped them 20 or 30 years ago. We suggest that we need to reduce emissions by almost half by 2030. That's in 8 years. We need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And we can't just control carbon dioxide. We also have to look at methane, which is a very important greenhouse gas associated with both agriculture and waste. Next. The good news is that Ipcc assesses that we have many options available now across many different sectors that would allow us to halve emissions in the next few years if we take decisions now. And there are great details about how we can reduce the use of fossil fuel energy, how we can plant trees and have climate-friendly land use, what we can do with our cities. And then one of the new chapters for Ipcc is how we can actually reduce our demand for energy and food in ways that would help us reduce the impact on the climate. Next. So what do they suggest? We need to eliminate coal and have a very rapid reduction in fossil fuel use. We need even more rapid expansion of renewables. We need to electrify as much as we can, whether that's vehicles or other uses of energy. We can make enormous strides still in energy efficiency. We waste a lot of energy. And we can reduce demand by high consumers. Transport through flying less, one of the reasons I'm speaking to you remotely, through the size and the way we heat our buildings, and by shifting our diet towards more plant-based diets. And then we need innovation. We're starting to see the possibility of alternative fuels. Next. There was some very good news in the latest report. They document that the costs of renewables have dropped dramatically for solar photovoltaic, for onshore wind, for batteries for electric vehicles. And in some cases, those costs are now below those of fossil fuels. Of course, they are still too expensive for many of the poorer populations of the world to afford them. Next. A few of the other mitigation solutions are the nature-based solutions, protecting and capturing carbon in forests, in grasslands, in soils, in blue carbon through replanting mangroves. And they also talk about how much money we need to make this transition to a lower carbon future. An increased finance of 3 to 6 times, but it's a very small percentage of our GDP compared to what we might lose if we don't make this transition. We need the full range, the full portfolio of regulation, incentives, investment, markets, persuasion. We do need to innovate in terms of new technologies for capturing carbon through air capture and carbon storage, but they're not yet financially or technically fully feasible. And they do set out some warnings about offsetting emissions. We can't keep emitting and hope that we'll offset it by planting billions of trees. And also some concerns about what we call geoengineering, whether we could in some way block the sun's rays in order to cool the planet. Next. So I'm making a very brief summary, but one of the most exciting insights of the IPCC work and the hundreds of scientific articles that we read is that it is possible to identify winning combinations. What are the things that we can do that reduce climate risks by adaptation, reduce greenhouse gas emissions through mitigation, that enhance biodiversity, and also achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which would help us eradicate poverty and hunger and address a number of other important issues in sustainable development. This is what is called climate resilient development. And in the IPCC reports, they look at things like the role of nature-based solutions, the role of urban design, and how they can provide these multiple wins for people and the planet. So I'll end there so that we can have a conversation, and I'll be happy to answer questions both now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diana. Certainly important, I think, to set the stage scientifically and help us understand, what science has been telling us, not just today, but as you rightly point out, for decades. I want to turn to Dr. Dhwan now and zero in specifically on India. We talked at a high level, and we looked at issues from a high level with Diana, but among the IPCC reports, one of the most recent reports on adaptation and vulnerability, the IPCC singled out India and countries across Asia and Africa in particular for multiple challenges related to climate-induced disasters over the next 2 decades, unless we act very quickly. So the question is, do Indian authorities have the public support, the political will, to do what needs to be done in ways that are not solely in vested national interests? Can we do this collectively?
Yeah, it goes without saying, because we can't put everything to the government side or IPCC, because they'll bring out the issues that it's a serious threat. So IPCC has done its job, I'll put it that way, and bringing awareness at the global level. We talk of COP, so there again, it's the leaders which make commitments. And I'm very glad that our Honorable Prime Minister, he made commitments in a way that is showing to the country, showing first to the world that India is serious, and more to our own people. See, now why India and Africa, they are taken very seriously is, one is the large population. The other is we are still growing. So it is not that for us emissions have already peaked out. The answer is no, we are still growing. That also gives us an option to go for green solutions, green economy development. And if we go in the right way, if we go wrong, then no one can stop disasters. And we are already facing not of what we have done. It is because what is happening at the global level. It's not our poor people who have emitted CO2 or the other greenhouse gases. We are much below the per capita emissions. But if these emissions, and as I said, we are growing economy. Now coming to action, first is that political will, it's very much there. The other is that the corporates on their own, they are making their own commitments. They are looking at how to be net zero in years to come. And they are willing to go for, I should say, the greener kind of solutions which are available in the market. Now, where the problem lies? The problem lies that large corporates, yes, they will definitely go for it, but for smaller, do we have the solutions? Do they have the power to take that initial load, the financial load? And there I say that even the international community, they have to come in. One is not asking for subsidies. One is asking for maybe the initial investment which is required. It can be a soft loan. And more than the soft loan, it is that technologies should be made available. The objective of West, they must realize that we only have one planet to live. And therefore, making monies through IPR is not the answer, because if we are not here, the planet is suffering. That's not the answer. So those technologies not only should be made available, they should be developed further along with our countries, India and Africa, because we have very different set of conditions. It's not the large corporates, it's everyone. You look at the cooking, what our people are doing today. Don't they require clean cook stoves? So it is that they'll use less of wood. Indoor air pollution will be reduced, so you are reducing burden even on the health issues. So that is what should be the objective. And I'll come down to, I should say, each one of us. And that is, we have to move away from consumerism back to nature. Isn't it, it's our responsibility to look at our actions on daily basis. Like what has happened over the past, we have forgotten. For us, it is what we require. We are very happy it's a global village. But does that mean everything has to come from overseas or long distances, or we have to use what is locally available? How many clothes do we require? So do we ever think even twice? It's affordability at that stage. We don't look back that even to get this pair of jeans or shirt, how much of water must have been utilized, what are the GHG emissions, and so on. And pandemic has actually taught us we can do with so little. And the kind of nature which we enjoyed during the time of pandemic, whether it was blue skies or biodiversity around your house, we had totally forgotten about it and got into materialism. So therefore, for every step, whether it is use of public transport, whether it is what we consume on daily basis, that is to be looked by each one of us. So government will is there. To quite many things, we do have the solutions, but I should say that we have to look at those solutions in a much serious way. And not only when the air pollution actually hits city like Delhi, it is that we have to look, it's going to happen next year as well. So how are we going to tackle them? So look at those solutions and more importantly, implement them. So we are on the right path, because I'll say a decade ago, you had to convince people that climate change is a threat. Now, even for the things for which you don't have to blame climate change, for example, the pandemic, everyone says, see, it's the impact of climate change. So that is wrong, not put everything on climate change, but it's good to see that that awareness is there.
So it's the individual action, which is interesting, that it almost sounds like what you're saying is that it's more magnified, perhaps, in a country like India, where individual action, individual choice, how you cook at home and the solutions that people are provided can have an exponential impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's every stage. See, look at the emissions. So if you're burning wood in open versus you have improved cook stoves. Similarly, you are talking of electric vehicles. So if we go wrong, it will be all coal-based electric generation. It's not going to help us. So it has to be solar-based. So all these little things, they are to be looked into holistic view. It's the LCA, life cycle analysis of a particular technology you must do. So, but that awareness is there, and I think we are on the right direction. And also, like, once you have made the commitment, you have to fulfill that. And made in India is another thing which perhaps will take us towards that you produce things in India at a competitive price, and at the same time make use of, say, use solar panels. You can't, we generate so much of the electronic waste in this country. We are number 3 in creating electronic waste. So therefore, we also have the responsibility of creating mechanisms to get back whatever we can do or recycle or whatever best can be done with that.
So on the individual action front, I want to turn to Sonam, who's sitting here patiently. Because Because when we think about the things that we can do as individuals, and one of the themes of this conference is action at all levels, action at governmental levels, action at business levels, action at the individual level. Now, you're from a part of India that has suffered pretty dramatically from the impacts of climate change. The temperatures have been increasing significantly in Ladakh, and as a result, glaciers, an important source of water for agriculture, have been retreating. Can you talk a little bit about your work, not only as an engineer, but as somebody who's been bringing practical solutions to some of these challenges that you face?
Thank you. My work initially has been around education, to bring reforms to take into account the realities around you, especially for mountain people. There's very little that can be useful in the mountains in the textbooks. But of late, more and more urgency I see in what we practically face on the fields. Every spring there's a drought followed by a flash flood. So I have been through these. 2006, when we went to a village where we are now establishing an alternative university exactly for these solutions. 2006, there was a big flash flood in this village, and I went as a volunteer to help. And I happened to ask an old man, when did you last see such a flood? Because houses had been washed away, 1 or 2 people had died. And this man said, I don't remember at all, only heard stories of it. That was 2006. 2010, the big flash flood, we lost some 1,000 people in the city of Leh. The next was 2012, then 2015, then 2017. So the frequency is dramatic now. And all these are followed by a drought. Some villages are now becoming what you would call climate refugees, and we are working in one to try and rehabilitate them after 10 years of abandoning the village, tiny village of Kulum, using small baby glaciers by freezing the winter water that you can't use in the winter, and using technology like drip irrigation and enhancing it with tourism, homestay, rural tourism. We are trying to rehabilitate them. Last year, this village produced for the first time after 12 years potatoes in their village. So small things like this. And on the other hand, we also believe that we should not contribute to this. We should not only cry about what the world is doing and adapt, but we should also mitigate. So we are working on solar heated houses. The solar heated school that we built in the mid-90s has not used a drop of oil or a blade of grass or wood to burn, and all we need is sun to keep us at plus 18 when it is minus 20. Now today we are working to change the Indian army. Around Ladakh, 3 armies are there in the coldest parts of the planet, Pakistan, China, India. You can imagine the amount of fuel that is burned to keep soldiers from otherwise warm places warm in or heated in these polar climates. So last year, for the first time, we did prototypes for the Indian Army that didn't need any heating, and they were between plus 12 to plus 18. And we say you don't want plus 22. You're not a 5-star hotel. You have to be ready for minus 30 battles. So people are, able to cut down. So if this, our hope is that Indian Army takes the lead and the Chinese Army follows and the Pakistani Army follows. They are also coal. Their soldiers are coal, and their emission is not, any boundaries don't define. So we are trying to clean up air pollution and emissions in this area. But then there's a but, and the but is a big but. The but is that we in Ladakh making few ice cones here and there or few buildings can't change emissions. It will continue as long as people in the big cities of the world carry business as usual. So that's why on Mahatma Gandhi's 150th anniversary, we said, let's try and be audacious and try change the world. So we started a small movement, a global movement of sorts, called the I Live Simply movement, through which we wanted to convey to the world that these little things we are doing as a last attempt, as we are the first victims. Very soon you will be engulfed. So wisdom is in taking precautions. So join and change your behaviors, change your lifestyles. And it was presented as a fun thing for young people because they are the ones who will make the world better or worse. So we made it into a crowdfunding campaign where you don't fund money. The planet doesn't any longer need your money, but it needs your lifestyle change. So you contribute pledges to change your lifestyles, and there's a site, ilivesimply.org, where many people, I think some, $19 million worth. These dollars are some kind of green dollar, that the site equates to the pledges you make. The young person may decide to go from, or old person, little more difficult, but young ones are doing it better, to switch from cars to trains, aeroplanes to trains, cars to bicycles, or walking, or children pledging to not waste food. All kinds of pledges they're making, and the site tells them how much they're contributing. I truly feel that we need to redefine all these things. When I say these dollars, these are just imaginary dollars on the side. But I actually think that we need to change the definition of the economy. Long ago we thought gold was precious just because it was glittering and it was rare. So we based our whole activities around this goal. Today, I think oxygen is more precious, and reducing carbon dioxide is more precious. And these two things are done best by trees. So maybe our economy should be based on how many trees you plant. And countries like India and Africa have a huge possibility of being rich in this and making the whole world clean. If our economy was based not on these silly, digital mining. I'm surprised that you can have bitcoins based on some silly mining that is all made up. Why can't we base it on planting trees and taking carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen? That's a much more life-saving principle to base our economy on. Anyway, I'm a bit carried away.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, as you're speaking, the idea of merging adaptation with mitigation is something that I think we got out of the message today from the Dalai Lama, that we need to be prepared, we need to implement technology and solutions, but we also need to ready ourselves for the change that's coming. Right. And it sounds like in your community you're doing both. And when it comes to spending on adaptation, the historical spending levels have been incredibly low on adaptation. COP26, one of the themes to emerge from that was really to push adaptation as a priority. It's something that you've been doing in your community, but as you look out at the rest of India, the rest of the world, it sounds like your message is adapt now, because
adapt and redefine. Like I said, redefine economics, redefine religion, spirituality. As I was saying earlier, now no longer, vice and virtue or sin and vice should not be about who killed who. It should be about who emitted more. The sinners redefined, virtuous redefined. You understand? Education needs to be redefined for the children. We don't do the same things that led us to the mess that we are in. 300 years ago, maybe pair of shoes was so precious. It was right to make factories that made shoes. But today you're buying 42nd pair of shoes and 45th pair of shoes. Doesn't make sense. Redefine. And even economics itself, the law of diminishing utilities says your 45th pair of shoes will not give you the satisfaction.
Right.
So still we defy economics even. Okay, we defy spirituality and religion, we don't care, but economics at least believe in. We don't seem to.
Can the people online see me? Because I can't see them. There they are. Don't move a cable. I can see you perfectly now. Ellie, I want to bring you into the conversation. Thank you both for waiting patiently. For the last couple of minutes, you've been a black screen, so I wasn't sure if you were there, but it's nice to see you again. So as I said, one of the themes of COP26 was the clear need to spend more on adaptation. And one of the themes of your work has been an equitable and inclusive approach to dealing with climate change and climate justice. It's been a key motivator for you as an activist and as a politician. So if you could just give us a sense, as the lone policymaker on our panel, how are you taking the science and the calls of urgency and implementing them into policy?
Thank you very much. First of all, Greg, let me thank you for the invitation and tell you how honored I am to be with you today to participate to such an important discussion in the context of the Dialogue for Our Future, opened this morning by very important key words by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. As you said, I'm trying to live together my life as a lawmaker, a vice president of a region today in the regional government, and the activist that I am still for social and climate justice. And it's not easy because, as Diana Liverman said before, institutions are not listening enough to what science is telling us and has been telling us for decades right now. It's impressive if you think about it, because institutions needed to face the global pandemic to really listen to science. Why are they not making this on climate emergency? Because it's clear, we don't have much time left. So we need to step up our efforts and introduce a real political will to make a change. Why are we so obsessed in keeping together social and climate justice? Because they are deeply interconnected. And if you see what is happening around us, you see that climate change is not affecting everyone and every place in the same way. Climate change is hitting harder the ones who are already most marginalized, the most vulnerable parts of all our societies, but also the poorest countries at the global level. And you can see it when you think, for example, at Lake Chad in Africa, connecting 4 or 5 African countries. It was the 7th largest in the world, and it has shrinked as an effect of climate change and global warming, and leaving so many people in poverty or forced migration. So I don't know if we are expecting to be climate refugees ourselves, as Professor was saying, to act. We cannot afford that. We only have one planet, we only are one people. So at the same time, studies show how the poorest people are facing a double likelihood to live in a fragile context in terms of exposition to extreme weather events. And this is also true. After Hurricane Stan in Guatemala, child labor increased by 7%. So you see how these two things are interconnected. So the question is, are we able to drive decarbonization with redistributive policies? And my answer is yes, we can. And we are trying also in the regional level to do so. And we have concrete example on how we can make it. Just a couple of examples. We are investing a lot of money, 20 million euros at the regional level, on energy efficiencies of the public housing, where the poorest parts of our society live. Why? Because they deserve as well, sparing money in the energy bill and at the same time reducing the greenhouse gas emission that comes from their heating. So you understand, we need to shape different policies for the different needs of our communities and territories. This way, we can ensure a fair ecological transition. That means reducing at the same time our impact on the planet and reducing inequalities, because it's terribly unfair that who is paying today and I see Mitzi, and I'm very happy to be with her today. If you see it, it's so unfair that who is paying the highest price of climate change are those countries and those people who have contributed the least to global warming. And at the same time, it's also unfair to see the so-called Earth Overshoot Day coming sooner and sooner and every year, and showing that we are literally stealing the future of the next generation. So I think that there are a lot of things that we can do. You know, what gives me hope is that we are not here. We are not come to this situation by chance. It was the effect of wrong political choices. That's bad news, but it's also good news because it means that we can mobilize collectively to change these decisions, to change these policies and choices, and to go and point in a different direction. It's true, we need political will, more coherent policies. I have to say something is moving. I have to admit that, for example, in the European Union, there is a new program called the Green New Deal. It's not perfect, but it's a step that didn't exist before. It's about, let's say, giving money, public investment, but driving them towards a concrete change in terms of ecological conversion. And this is something new. So something is changing, and that's also because of the mobilization of the young generation. They did make a difference. They managed to point out science. They didn't say we have the truth in our pocket. They pointed out at Diana Lieberman and say we have to listen to them because we have the solution. We need to invest more, as you, Greg, pointed out. I know you discussed it in the morning with His Holiness Dalai Lama, to invest more in research and innovation to find and provide solutions for decarbonization in all the responsible sectors. Agriculture that needs to be more sustainable, that needs to end the use of chemical products, for example, and be less intensive. We have solutions for mobility and sustainable mobility. Just to give you another example, we are investing in the Regione Emilia-Romagna to make free public transportation for young people up to 19 years old. Why? Because those families spare money, and at the same time, we incentivize sustainable mobility, not to take your car to go to school every day. So you understand, we have solution for all sectors. Electrification, as was pointed out correctly also by Dr. Dawan and Diana Lieberman before, energy sector. And I remember that you mentioned the World Energy Outlook report in 2020 said that the solar energy reached the lowest cost of electricity in human history. That means it's also convenient to go in this direction. And let me also add, to conclude, that there is a convenience in circular economy. We also need to reduce our consumption, to reduce our wastes, to reduce the plastic use, but we have alternatives. And these alternatives are more convenient also for corporate, because wastes are costs for them today. If you recycle, if you reuse, if you exchange part of your waste with other, let's say in the circular economy with other enterprises, then you're also sparing money. And so we have all interest in going this direction. And as I said, just to conclude, we need really to put more resources in that. You pointed out, I was very interested in hearing who spoke before me, it's not enough. And in the last COP in Glasgow, I was very disappointed in this. We need to step up our resources for transition. We need to make sure it goes to real transformative projects and not to greenwashing, because we are also seeing this in Europe a lot. And we need to help more the most vulnerable and poorest parts of the world to accompany them in the transition that we all need. So I think this is the way that we have to, let's say, bring on together. And I want to be hopeful because I really see more, let's say, awareness in the new generation of intersectionality. That means keeping together the struggle and our efforts for social and climate justice, because this is the only way to both save the planet and humankind.
Thank you. Before I go to Mitzi, I want to ask just a quick follow-up. I mean, you have a very unique position amongst us today as being a strong advocate before you became a politician. What has been some of the most enlightening challenges or potential sources of optimism as you made that transition? For those of us watching policymakers in many parts of the world drag their feet and not do enough, it's easy to become despondent. But when I listen to you, I feel hopeful. So how did you kind of marry the sense of activism with the practical application of implementation?
It's a very good question, and it's very difficult. I mean, we can try every day to push, let's say, the institution in a new direction. It's very difficult because, as I said, usually institutions and politicians are not so, let's say, do not pay enough attention to what science is saying, to what, for example, Ipcc reports are saying. And so it's difficult, but I see today more opportunities because the Green Deal at the European level was not there 5 years ago when I was a member of the European Parliament. We were just a few asking for that kind of instrument to accompany all different economic sectors towards change. Now it's there. And as I said before, it's there more because of the extraordinary mobilization of the new generation across every border. That works. Mobilization works. We don't win on everything, but it's slowly, too slowly, as Diana pointed out correctly in her speech, too slowly, but it's now we have more arguments and we have also more resources to go in this direction. If you ask me, Greg, what is lacking? Well, it's lacking, let's say, an awareness of how we can monitor the impact of public investment, both on economic, occupation, social, environmental, and also gender impacts. This is on what we are trying to implement now also in the institution that, you know, they work like in silos. And we need a cross-cutting approach to achieve decarbonization. But as I said, we're also working on reforestation. Professor was telling before how important it is. We are donating for free 4.5 million new trees to schools, to municipalities, to citizens, in order to also foster reforestation. And just one last example, because I know it came out earlier this morning in the discussion with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We are now introducing a new regional law for renewable energy communities. How do they work? I mean, energy independence is a question of democracy. We see it today dramatically with the war in Ukraine. It's a fossil fuel war that came out this morning. I agree. And let's say renewable energies are the only energies of peace and energy independency. But communities, renewable energy communities work from the bottom up. They build communities to auto-produce and auto-consume renewable energies. And again, you spare the money of the energy bill, but you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So another example of how we can foster putting 12 million euros at the regional level of the European funds in order to, let's say, diffuse this kind of approach also at the citizen level. So there are a lot of things that we can do to match the gap between the institution and this awareness that come from science, but again, also from this new awareness on intersectionality of the new generations.
We're very lucky to have a member of that new generation, in air quotes, with us. Mitzi, thanks for being patient. And I intentionally waited to bring you in at the very end because I wanted to ask you, after hearing from policymaker, after hearing about the science, after hearing about frontline communities, and after hearing about what science and business and policymakers are doing in India, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about all this? What do you think needs to be done, and what's not being done?
When I'm in rooms and talks like this, I always feel like there's so much hope because we have policymakers here, we have scientists here, we have, everyone's in here. It's almost like everyone's on board. Everyone wants to fix this. And then you go out of the spaces like this a little bit and suddenly, we're a really small space. Like the people who are on board, we're a really small crowd. And that is so scary because you'd think that with the climate science coming out almost, I think there are updates to reports like very regularly, and if not regularly, reports or other, like aside from IPCC reports, are also always updates to science. And there are climate disasters happening so often throughout the year, yet people still aren't waking up, especially politicians, especially the multinational companies. And you almost think that, is it really because they're not waking up? Is it really because they don't know, or because they don't think it's important enough, because it's not happening to them? I think Ellie clearly talked about the intersections of social injustice and climate injustice. And we have to remember that this recently, since I'm seeing a lot of Filipinos in the room, the hashtag Let the Earth Breathe started trending here in the Philippines and across the world, I think, because there was a scientist rebellion and scientists were being arrested for protesting for climate justice. But the response of people was, the recommendation was to delete emails to reduce carbon footprints. The recommendation was to turn off their electricity. And that's the crucial thing that we have to follow up on next. Now people are waking up to the climate crisis. People are understanding that we're being impacted by the climate crisis and that countries like the Philippines, people of color, are the most impacted, yet there's no empowering segment to climate awareness and climate education. So people think that deleting emails, that turning off your lights, that living a zero waste lifestyle is the answer to the climate crisis, when it's really not. It's all about that systemic change. It's all about pushing for policy change, because it's not individuals who are responsible for the climate crisis. At least it's not anyone in this room, I'm sure. It's the multinational companies, where there's only been 100 companies responsible for over 70% of carbon dioxide emissions. It's the richest 1%, where the richest 1% emit double the emissions of the 50% world poorest. So it's really about holding these polluters accountable. That's what we need in order to achieve climate justice. It's ensuring that we have empowering climate education that's contextualized to each of our communities, to each of our experiences. Because as I was growing up, I was learning about climate change, sure, but it was about ice bears, ice caps and polar bears, but not about how the typhoons I was experiencing was climate change. You know, we need climate education that's empowering and lets you know that collective action is the key to climate justice and not this individual lifestyle changes. And as already mentioned, we need that reparations from the global north, from the countries that are most responsible for the climate crisis. We need reparations, not climate finance, in terms of aid or help or solidarity funds. They're climate finance as reparations, because this is something that global north countries owe to countries like the Philippines, like India, like the rest of the global south. And these have to come in the form of grants and not loans, because a lot of climate finance now is in the form of loans, which means that our countries go into debt because of the climate change impacts that their countries cause. So there's so much wrong in that idea that I don't understand why not more people are angry about it. And for those reparations, it has to go into adaptation, people-centered adaptation, and to minimize and manage the loss and damages that we're already experiencing. With terms of adaptation, we have to make sure that it is people-centric, because there are adaptation measures now where you displace people and move them somewhere else, but you don't make sure that their livelihoods are kept intact. So that's not the kind of adaptation that we need. The kind of adaptation we need is the type that ensures their livelihood, ensures people's dignity, and makes sure that we listen to people and that we empower people and we help them understand what is needed. And it's adaptation that is actually appropriate for their communities. There are adaptation measures here in the Philippines where they plant mangroves, but then that area isn't a place for mangroves to grow. And so the mangroves are dying. The politicians think they're doing a great job. People are saying that it's just causing them more floods because it's not what's fit for their community. So we really have to ensure also that there's support for our scientists, that there's support for research into what adaptation looks like. And at the end of the day, we always have to remember that even though it seems so depressing and drastic and as if there's nothing that we can do, there are people who are working on this, and we need as many people to join us. And you can be anyone from anywhere to join the movement. You don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a policymaker, you can be anyone and you can join the movement, and you can contribute to making sure that we are building a world where people are safe, building a world where no one is left behind.
Thank you. You know, you started by saying that it can be a little bit, sad that you realize how small the bubble is sometimes. And our effort in putting this event together was to try to expand that bubble. We chose to do our event in Dharamsala in northern India, but we wanted to invite people maybe who hadn't met the Dalai Lama or who hadn't been to this part of India or maybe had never met a Tibetan. And so we wanted to expand that bubble and expand the circle. And I think we achieved that in some way. But there's a big elephant in the room. We don't have anyone from China here to talk to us about the things that China's doing. Now, this is an open question. China's commitment to net zero is actually, at least on paper, more aggressive than India's. China has pledged to hit peak emissions of CO2 by 2030 and be net zero by 2060. When we try to engage in small communities like this, it might be difficult. But when policymakers are engaging with China, there's maybe more success or not. I guess the question is a bit of a rhetorical one, but I throw it out to everyone. Can we work separately and achieve the same thing and achieve an outcome? Or do we really, really, really need China at events like this? So it's a question to anyone. But if we are making commitments and pushing forward, can we do it separately? Or do we need to be in lockstep? You're sitting to my left, so I'm going to ask you. You take that one if you could.
Okay. Well, I'll put it this way, whether it is China or any other country in the world, they won't be able to do without it. It is that China do things very secretively. They want to develop their own technologies rather than becoming partners. And if it is good for themselves as well, because what we are hearing or otherwise, our next generation is far more responsive than us. Because see, if you look at how we move ourselves, earlier it was that, as Sonam rightly mentioned, that a pair of shoes was something which was cherished upon, and not when you buy the 45th one. But now when the next generation is going to buy the 45th one, they are perhaps going to ask the question, how was it produced? Earlier it was necessity. I wanted a pair of shoes irrespective of whether it is produced in my country or it is being imported. But over a period of time, we are going to move towards how responsibly this product has been produced. And all the countries on this globe, they are going to have, because we are also moving from imports to that you have to produce indigenously. And we are also talking about that use what can be produced naturally rather than getting things from far off places. So whatever little, if China also has to survive, they can't do without making commitments and sticking to it. That's my view.
I mean, that's a lesson that I think we've been able to take away from COVID, right? That becoming more self-sufficient within your own borders can cut down on a lot of these challenges.
Exactly, or both COVID and what is happening in Ukraine. Because the major problem with Ukraine-USSR war today is how are we going to feed the world? Because we are going to face food shortage maybe this year itself. Already Europe and other countries, the major game is that of energy, and we are realizing that we need to be self-sufficient, we need to generate our own energy. And I think that's also somewhere positive, because what we are talking of renewables, that will get a boost, because you can't depend on any neighboring country, and we are also on crossroads, whether to say no or yes, because how do you balance your equation both with the Rus as well as USA. But we are also going to suffer because most of the fertilizer production is in that region.
Right.
So our next year food production is also going to suffer. So therefore we have to be, the self-sufficiency in energy is going to be as big as equivalent to your food security. So therefore when we are talking of these issues, yeah, maybe Sonam wants to add something.
Add to that, yes, energy plays a huge role in which countries and all the geopolitics, but there's a lot that people can also do, you know. I feel half the energy that we use is not what we need, but what we just waste. I'll just give you two examples, and then we can see how countries are being attacked for hardly any reason. I was in Mongolia 1 month ago. Outside it was minus 18 and I sweated at plus 27 inside. Now why did you have to misuse the planet to be uncomfortable, Then it doesn't end here. Then I went from Mongolia straight to Mumbai to shiver in an air-conditioned hall that was at 18 degrees, outside was nearly 40. Why did we have to overdo it so much, feel uncomfortable and have countries like Ukraine attacked? If we just live simply, then half the problems of the world will be solved. So we all also have a huge responsibility. You're right that policy makers have a responsibility, but please remember, to my friend from Philippines, that policy makers are influenced when voters are educated. When voters really consider something valuable, policymakers will follow. So that's why I think individuals are very important. If individuals prioritize an issue, you don't have to go with the flags to the policymakers. They'll see where their interests are in the next election. So it's so important not only to change the consumption patterns and relieve the world of half the food we cook is wasted. I mean, why do we go to those lengths and then finally put it in the dustbin? So we have to change also, and if we change, not only will these patterns change, but policymakers will then see that this is what pleases the people. I don't see policies changing until people change.
I'd just like to add what Sonu just said. We have a campus in Teri, Gwalpahari, and I invite organizers to have the meeting over there next time, which is built on the concept of sustainability. It's a training complex with 30 rooms and lots of conference rooms, which is not connected to the grid. And way back in 2000, we decided that it should be with photovoltaics, biomass-based gasifier, so that also we collect within the campus the wood which is required for it, and concept of earth-air tunnel. So everything is taken care of. It's extremely comfortable, but you can do without. And the entire waste is also generated, is utilized over there. It's zero waste generation campus as well. So, and then we are talking of buildings. We have to construct, India has to construct more than 50% of infrastructure which we have today. Why not to go sustainable? And that is where you have to work on sustainable building design as well as sustainable building material. So there are so many things, and we do have the answers. It is that we have answers for many. Rest are, and nothing will be perfect, because tomorrow we are going to have a better technology. But whatever we have today, we are still not adopting that.
Yeah. Let's want to try to engage you online as much as we can. Your faces are very big in front of us. So if you want to interject, please do. Any thoughts or comments that you wanted to raise on any of these points?
Yeah, I wanted to add that when we say we and people, we have to be really careful, because definitely us in the room here, I'm making a general assumption, I might be wrong, but us in the room here, we should, whenever we can, reduce consumption and do individual lifestyle changes. If you have the privilege to do so, do it, because it is a privilege. But we have to remember that majority of people, 50% of the world's poor, barely contribute to the climate crisis. The biggest contributions come from the 1% richest, which I'm pretty sure none of us are part of. So while individual lifestyle change is helpful, it is never going to be enough in the system that we're in. But what's important is that we recognize that as individuals, like you said, we do have power to change things by talking to our politicians, by working with our scientists, by working within our universities to make sure that they divest, by talking to our banks to make sure that they don't invest in fossil fuel industries. There are ways to do things as individuals together, collectively. And definitely we need people to be involved for policymakers to move, because let's be honest, Ellie is a diamond in the rough. Like there's not a lot of policymakers who are like her, who will recognize the intersections of social injustice and climate injustice, that will recognize and really prioritize the people and the planet. There's not a lot of policymakers like that. And to be able to help policymakers like Ellie, we need to put pressure on the rest of the policymakers so it becomes normal to talk about climate justice. So it becomes normal to, as you said, transition our economy and our view of development from this view of everlasting growth of profit of the global north, especially based on the overexploitation of the global south, to the quality of people's lives, to making sure that people can actually eat, people have a place to live, people have a place to sleep, people have the chance to educate themselves and dream and be free and do what they want without that fear of the climate crisis, without that barrier of social injustices. And when we're talking about China, I think it is important to have people from China, especially because that's how we get movements to grow, when we connect with other people. I've been able to talk to a few climate activists from China, although it is very difficult. And you can see how there's so much passion for them to show the world that they are there, that there are climate activists there who are trying to change things, but it's a very different process. It's very slow and it's very difficult, but they are there. And so we should be talking to them whenever we can to show solidarity also, because that's also how we strengthen their movement, because they take inspiration from us and we take inspiration from them. And I think in general, someone already mentioned it earlier, but we need everyone. We need every country to collaborate on this global issue. And that's what we're not seeing from a lot of the big countries, from a lot of the global north countries, especially. There is no collaboration. And that's where I'm so confused, because you see climate activists from different countries, different cultures, different languages collaborating all the time. And if young people can do it, why can't the politicians?
Yeah, Diana, please.
I'll just make a couple of comments following up partly on Mitzi. And I do want to say that there's been a lot of improvement in collaboration in Ipcc. And I did want to mention that the latest report, it used to be that there were only a handful of women and there were only a handful of scientists from the global south. And now we still have a long way to go, but some of the most powerful voices are from the global south, from science and from women, and I really appreciate that. Second point is just to say that part of the credit, if you like, for the drop in the price of PV and wind is actually China producing renewables, although we need to be careful that the materials are produced through sustainable and just mining. And the final point I would make is Ipcc struggles a little bit with pointing fingers at particular countries because it's an intergovernmental process. And if you start saying this country is to blame, you actually can't get your report approved. But one of the ways that Ipcc has addressed it is, rather than talking about countries, is talking about income groups. So even within some of the less well-off countries, there are very rich people. And so we can sometimes address this by looking to our highest consumers. And the final point I would make is, yes, we think we live in democracies, and if the people put pressure on politicians, they'll change. But in the two countries of which I'm a citizen, one from my accent and one from where I teach in the US, the special interests often control the politicians, not the grassroots voters. And that's something that we need to overcome if we want to solve climate change.
I can't see, here we go. Ellie, this is a provocative question for you, and then I want to open it up to have a couple of minutes for questions. On that last point, is democracy the right form of government to solve this challenge? We need to move fast, and democracy seems to move slow.
Well, obviously, I think yes. I mean, it's better, because I also think that we need both the effort. I will come to that, because I'm really let's say interested in the comments that I heard. But you see, I think on one hand, we need all governments levels to act in the same direction. Otherwise, if our neighbors, I mean, we can write down the best decarbonization strategy of the world, and we should try to do that. But if our neighbors continue to point only on fossil fuels, I mean, it's so interconnected. It's a global challenge that, as you said in the beginning, Greg, no one can, let's say, can solve alone inside and within the national borders. That's clear. So we need to cooperate. I still believe, with all the criticism, I mean, with all the difficult parts of it, in multilateralism. So I think that we should continue to try to bring everyone at the table of the discussion, because in the slides of Diana in the beginning, we saw also the need for a framework of common incentives and sanctions as well, in order to do exactly what Mitzi was pointing out. We should make sure that who pays the so-called cost for the transition are not the usual ones, the most the poorest in our in and within, let's say, and between societies. And I really think that, as you said, of course, probably after the pandemic and the war, we will need to rethink, to reshape economics, and we will need to reshape the supply chains and make them shorter. 0 kilometer, we say in Italian. I don't know if it's the same, if it makes sense, but closer. Proximity, that's the point. I think that we need both these pressures. Mitzi was saying, and I thank her really for her words. She is right. I believe I really believe what she says. Sometimes I feel useless because I feel alone. There are not many of us. And also Diana is right. Too often there is a reason why our national parliament again is pointing in a moment of, let's say, difficult times, again on methane and gas. And that's not the way. But why? Because politicians too often listen more the voice of the big interests and the big lobbies of fossil fuels instead of the voice of scientists and activists. But what I'm trying to say here is that I witnessed in these years of activism into the institution that something is really changing for once. So of course, we are not out of the problems, but I see more room. And you know why? Because it's true also that all of us, any of us, can take its own part of responsibility to make this change happen. What struck me of the mobilization of Fridays for Future and other movements is that it's not only about going in the streets together and being on the media and putting pressure on politicians. It's what they make when they go back home after cleaning up the streets and not leaving, wastes and plastic around. It's how they change the mentality of their sisters and brothers and neighbors to make the smallest change that we also need, because it's true what Professor was saying before. We can and we must shape better policies, but if we don't shape them listening to the voice of the people and the territories and the communities, especially the most vulnerable, we will not shape the right policies. That's what Mitzi was correctly pointing out in terms of floods and consequences. So just to end up, what we are trying to do as an example in Regione Emilia-Romagna, knowing that you cannot do this change with a, let's say, top-down approach, we sat down with all the representation of the regional communities, enterprises, municipalities, universities, CSOs, civil society organizations, and also some environmentalist organizations. And we wrote together with 55 organizations, many hands, a pact for work and climate, defining, let's say, shared vision and shared objectives. And towards those objectives, every one of us, in the different role we have in society, we push in the same direction, we push our policies in that direction, and we put our resources in that direction, shared together. So I think this is kind of approach that we can push already in the politics, but just to end up, we need to rebuild bridges between awareness and mobilization and representation in the institution. Otherwise, I will be a useless species in extinction risk, you understand? We need more biodiversity also in politics, and we can, with good pressure and mobilization, let's say, reach this goal.
That might be the quote of the conversation. More biodiversity in politics. I would go to questions in the audience here, but just a comment. When we were speaking with the Dalai Lama today, somebody asked him, how we can inspire others to act, and he said, well, it starts right here. It starts with you. And then it starts with you and your community. And exactly that's what you were just talking about, Ellie. So thank you for that observation. We have a couple more minutes for questions in the room, if there are any. Yeah, over here. Yeah, and if you could say who you are and where you're from, please.
So my name is Sushma, and I don't think this is working. Is it?
It's okay. Yeah.
So I'm an architect. I work in sustainability, and I live here in Dharamshala since the last 6 years or so. So my question, first of all, I just had a reaction to what Mitzi said about how individual action is not really going to change anything, and that it needs to be at a policy level. And I kind of disagree with that, because I think that becoming aware is our responsibility, and then as our awareness grows, we can do more. And the way I see it, big businesses are basically selling us things, and we are the consumers. So when we say that we don't want to buy something that you're doling out to us, even if it is, if it's plastics or petrol or whatever it is, but if we start to say we don't want petrol anymore and we don't want plastic anymore, then they're going to be forced to change their attitude towards what they're selling to us, sometimes even by manipulating legal machinery, So I think that as an individual and as a consumer, working collectively, we can make very big change. But having said that, since we're going into the idea of consumerism and how, like Mr. Wangchuk, he correctly said that consumerism is half of the thing. Like, if we can change our lifestyle, then a lot of things can change. So what I want to ask is, to the entire panel, what is your opinion about the increase in human population on consumerism and the climate change crisis? That's one question. And the second question is related to what you asked about democracy. About how do you think that it's helpful for the planet, the globe, which is a system that is interconnected, to be divided into so many different political barriers which are not always working in each other's interests? So it's open to the entire panel.
Great, thank you. Whoever wants to jump in. Mitzi, there was a direct challenge to you. Oh, Diana. Diana spoke first.
Quickly on population, I think that has, in a way, been responded to by the spread of women's rights around the world and the choice of women to have less children as a choice because of education and opportunities. So whilst the number of people matters, it's more about how much they consume each person. And global population is projected to level off because of women's rights and the choice to have less children. So I'm in some ways much less worried about the number of people than I am by the high consumption of the 1%.
For me, I said that individual lifestyle changes are enough. Individual action is important. I myself have gone vegetarian and do all the individual lifestyle changes, but it is a privilege to do so. There are so many people who cannot afford to buy in bulk or to buy sustainable products because the cheapest thing is the small stuff in sachets. And that's majority of people. And so we need systemic change to make individual lifestyle changes accessible to everyone. And again, as Diana just mentioned, it is about that consumption of the 1%. It is about that consumption of the richest individuals, because even if all of us in this room, even if all of us who are in the same income group as this room, just as Diana mentioned about the income groups, it is about the richest 1%. Even if all of us in the same income group of this room does that individual lifestyle change perfectly, it still won't be enough because of the system that we're in. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying, I'm not encouraging it. It's just not what I message or what I say and talk about a lot, because there's already so much propaganda on individual lifestyle change pushed by the fossil fuel industries themselves, as they coined the term carbon footprint. And when we talk about overpopulation, while the number of people is something to be worried about, especially with the limited resources of our planet, as Diana mentioned, it is about that consumption of the richest. And a lot of times we have to be careful with that, because the overpopulation excuse or reason is usually used by the global north countries to blame global south countries that are overpopulated for the climate crisis, when it's not the poorest countries in the world that are overpopulated, when it's not the masses of 99% or like even those world's poorest that are causing the climate crisis, really. Although there is a contribution, the main contribution again is always the richest. And so they're the people that we have to hold accountable and to move. And we do that by doing campaigns like boycott campaigns, which is what you just mentioned with not buying certain products and whenever it is possible. So these are the individual actions that you can do to push these large corporations in the 1%.
We had to say goodbye to Sonam. Unfortunately, he has a phone call, so he just ducked out stage right. And we are right at 1:30. Do we have one more question in the room? We can take a quick one. Yeah? Okay, we already have the mic. So this will be the last question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you want... So after she asks, we'll go to you. Two questions together, and then we'll wrap up with answers. Yeah.
Right. First of all, thank you so much for the really stimulating discussion about climate crisis. I'm Tenzin Chiki. I'm senior researcher at Tibet Watch. So we monitor human rights abuses and policy changes inside Tibet. And since all of you had a wonderful meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama early in the morning, I am reminded of his home in Tibet. So in 1980, when the third fact-finding mission went to Tibet to assess the level of education inside Tibet at the time, which was still under occupation, they went to Takhter, at the home of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and they saw that his home was turned into a grain storage house. And we know that Tibet is disproportionately affected by climate crisis, at least twice faster warming than the rest of the global average. So across the neighboring countries, we are witnessing more disasters, stronger in frequency as well as in scale. And indigenous responses are really important. We don't have time to think about how to act. And in that respect, there were a couple of earthquakes that happened. So in 2015 in Nepal, there was a really bad earthquake. And what happened was that Tibetan monks in Tibet, in Tengri Monastery, they were sending money relief fund to Tibetans who are stateless and living in Nepal. Afterwards, when this monk forgot his phone in some tea house in Tibet, it was recovered by the police. And just because of the fact that they found this monk to be sending money relief support for victims of earthquake, the group of monks were sentenced to really harsh prison terms of ranging from 5 to 20. So how can, this is an open question to everyone, how can we support indigenous responses towards the Tibetan people? And secondly, this was in 2015, and perhaps more recently, in October 2021, there was a 99-foot tall Buddha statue in Tangwa County in Kham, which was built purposefully towards mitigating earthquake, because in 1973, there was an earthquake in that area which claimed at least 2,000 lives. So the local Tibetans, who are mostly farmers and nomads, they voluntarily contributed money towards building a Buddha statue to mitigate human-induced disasters, and also for world peace. But that statue was forcibly demolished with no respect towards the Tibetans, no understanding towards why it was built. And even there were Tibetans arrested for showing the slightest of expressions of displeasure. So there's no understanding of how, we are in the exile, some sort of character of Tibetan exile, and this is happening inside Tibet, and indigenous responses are not respected. So how can, since climate activism is a very strong community, how can we support those voices in the front line? That's my question.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just quickly, before we answer, we have one more question, and then we'll do a quick round robin of answering those two questions. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Mishu. I'm from Palampur. I'm a college student here, a local. So the question I want to pose was to Mr. Sonawangchuk, who's not here. But when he comes back, or if someone communicates it to him, I just want to ask कि ये जो concept है of simply living, ये young individuals कैसे imbibe कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि एक बहुत बड़ा lack of initiative है youth में, आज के youth में. वो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा the majority of the Indian youth is either busy playing video games or just too much into just futile exercises.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the idea of simply living, how can the youth imbibe it? And especially the target of that youth is the one which has a huge lack of initiative. That is my question. So
Great, thank you. So how can we encourage youth to be less video game playing and more climate activism? And lessons from climate justice activists for Tibetans and other indigenous communities.
Well, I can answer your question. And that is, see, what has happened is, first of all, I'll blame my generation. Because it's our generation which had, I should say, we inherited everything. I should say we are the most fortunate lot because we had comparatively good environment and more money compared to our parents. So we had more of disposable income. So then we were wrong in terms of what should we leave for our children, and we became very materialistic. So money became the main thing, not the environment. And that is how we misused. Now our next generation, I'll say, and I repeatedly say, they are responsible, far more than us, because they can afford to be responsible. For them, it is that if they want to buy something, they will say, even if it's expensive, but it is produced by right methods, they will like to go for that. The other is where we have gone wrong, and I suppose we still have time to correct. And that is materialistic society that, okay, if you have money, go take the plane tickets and go to a new destination. We never tried to tell to our children what nature means. And the pandemic further added to it, because otherwise no screen time, 1 hour a day, then it became 100% screen time with online classes and so on. So whether kids are really attending to the classes or they are playing games, we don't know. And they have got addicted to it. So this de-addiction has to take place. I repeatedly say, like, why not to make a computer game, and which is basically on what is your carbon footprint for the day. So if the moment they'll write that they had gone on school bus versus their own car, what is the impact? If they have played video game and not played outside, how it has impacted. So we will also have to come out with these kind of things. And I'm sure they will respond because they have also seen the clean sky during the pandemic. They know what good nature means, what biodiversity means. So they are going to be far more receptive. And I'll really like to thank the organizers to have given me this opportunity. It's a very diverse, enthusiastic group. It's small, is beautiful, that's what I should say. And thanks to the organizer for getting such great people around to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Final thoughts from our panelists online? Mitzi, you're muted.
Yeah, I was muted. On the question of how can we encourage young people to join the movement, if they're playing video games and we create climate-related video games, there is one actually. I think it's called survivethecentury.com.org. I'm gonna look for it and try to set it before I stop talking. But it's basically that where the young people are, that's where we have to go and raise awareness and educate. Like the TikTok, I know there's no TikTok in India anymore, I'm sorry, but TikTok just went really wide here in the Philippines at one point. So we started doing TikTok dances and putting climate stuff on the TikTok dances. Whatever you need to do to hook people in, just that initial hook, and then bring them in deeper once they're in, then that's what you need to do. It is difficult, but once people are empowered with information and education, they'll see that, and they see that there is something that they can do. It's only a matter of time before they join the movement themselves.
Great, thank you. Diana, Ellie, last closing statements. I know we've gone a little long, and I appreciate you all staying here.
Yeah, I'll just say that, social media has its ups and downs. There's a lot of climate organizing in North America that occurs through phones. The most important thing is to put pressure on the social media companies to ensure that the energy is being produced renewably, that is supporting our social media and phone systems. And I just want to say in closing that I really hope that we don't have to produce another Ipcc report in 5 years where we've said the window has closed. So the science community will keep doing the research and monitoring. We will try to become activists too, but we need everybody at all levels to act. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you because it was really an enriching discussion and I'm honored to have met you all. I can only say that I agree that, let's say, strengthen indigenous response is very important. But in order to do that, it's important what Mitzi said, to be beware of our own privilege. If you listen to intersectionality, you understand that every person can be exposed to different layers of marginalization and discrimination. In these terms, I am a subject, as all women, to, let's say, gender inequalities. But I recognize my privilege if I compare my situation to that of Black women, migrants, for example, that I have met in detention centers that feel 3 different layers of discrimination, as women, as Black women, as poor Black women. So if you make this cultural change and you try to push this into the institution and into politics, in all countries, it's the same. I mean, we live in very different contexts. But the rule, it's the same. We need to listen to our communities and their needs, starting from the most vulnerable and their knowledge of what they need to be empowered to be more resilient also to what is happening around. And when we shape policies to decarbonize, to be more resilient also in terms of adaptation and mitigation, we have to listen to them. Otherwise, as I say every time to the people living in our mountains here, not far from Bologna, from where I'm speaking right now, I always say we cannot write the right policies in Bologna for what is happening in our mountains and on the coasts of our seaside. So you understand, it's about a general rule for all politician institutions. Listen to the territories and communities and create true situations, so that I'm ending on the young generation, thanking for the question. With young people, I think it's the same. To provide, let's say, places where institutions can dialogue, listen the solutions coming from their voices and not keeping them only words, but bringing into facts. We are trying to do this, for example, in our region with a forum for young people. I am a gamer and an activist as well. So I agree with also the solution of trying to use new languages. But let me tell you, institutions should really create frameworks to listen concretely to the voices of the new generation and reshape our policies at the same time, because again, the mobilization of this new generation are making a difference for real. Because for my generation, who was going in the street was a loser. And today, something has changed also with the use of new media, intelligent use. It has become cooler. You understand what I mean? It has become the place to be. At least in Italy, the mobilization on climate are very participated. So we know that not every young people is there, but it's spreading, and that gives me hope. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a fantastic place to end. Hope and pointing out that things are changing and things will change. And,
Accelerate.
And with our circle growing and expanding every year, Mitzi, we hope it continues to grow and the bubble doesn't stay small. So I want to thank all of the panelists online, Ellie, Diana, Mitzi, Viba for joining me on stage, and Sonam, who had to leave. One programming note, unfortunately, Carl Pope, who was supposed to be with us, you might have been wondering where he was, he has COVID, so he couldn't join us. So I wish Carl a speedy recovery. Thank you very much for joining us online and around the world, and here in Dharamsala. Panel 2 will start in about 30 minutes. And our MC has a couple of last closing thoughts.
First of all, I would like to present a kata to the one person who is here with us. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Greg, for moderating this event. And now we will meet 3:15 in this room again, and we will talk about technology and business. I have one announcement to do. Krista told me that there were some participants, or not participants, who ordered some drinks down there. I just ask you to, if you order something, please also pay. If you want to have free drinks, there's tea here, up here, so this is free for all, okay?
One of the benefits of being online, we don't, you're innocent in the
yes, exactly.
Skipping out on your bill.
Then, this morning, we had this audience with His Holiness. Today is Earth Day, and His Holiness issued a message on the Earth Day, and I just want to read two sentences out of this message, which you can also find online on our social media channels and on our website. In this statement, it says, "Our world is heavily interdependent. New challenges like the climate crisis that affect us all, as well as our participation in the global economy, mean that we must take the whole of humanity into account. We have to put the global interest first." And then I think it also echoes a little bit the message of hope that we had here today. It says, "Although nothing about the future can be guaranteed, we remain hopeful, which is much better than being pessimistic. Even as global warming increases in intensity, many young people in particular are working together to find and share solutions. They are our hope." So, thank you. Yeah.
And let me thank everyone online. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.